Hello, and welcome back to Essential Exchange. This is a radio show where we share information, education, and stories that people need to hear because community and connection are key. So, for those of you who are tuning back in, we are here again with the real English Elaine. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago about her background, her books, and her story. Elaine is a two-time suicide survivor. And today we're going to get a lot more in depth and in detail about her story and her journey through these suicide attempts. And so, Elaine, if you want to start us off, and then, we can kind of just go from there and I can ask you some questions.
Okay. Yeah, happy to. It's great to be back here. Natalie, thank you. So, wow, where do I begin? I remember, so yes, you're right. I am a two-time suicide attempt survivor. The first attempt was in 2014, and that really is the focus of my first book. My first book is called My Crazy Summer, a memoir. And basically, the story behind that attempt is, like many women, I would say, especially, we like to be in control, right? And, and I actually came from my background in terms of I was raised in kind of like, I would say, the projects in Liverpool, England. And I came from a working class family, and my father was an alcoholic. And he used to call me Brains because I was smart. So thankfully, I ended up, getting out of that environment through school, and I got pregnant and then got married. Thankfully, I'm still married to my husband of my daughter, Angela. And there were many different triggers in my life. So I know that all have.
So can I ask you something? So because you said something that kind of stood out to me that, to me is curious, but I think, you said, most of us women like to be in control. And I'm thinking as you're talking, about your story, right, and triggers and different things that you had to deal with growing up. So I don't know if it's necessarily just women, but maybe trauma, right, and things that happen to us in our childhood that cause us to feel the need to be in control. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Absolute sense. And I was of the mindset that I was not going to live the life that I had as a child. And so I basically, because of the trauma, so my best friend got killed when she was 16. And there was lots of trauma throughout my life that I believe led me to my first attempt. And basically what happened was my daughter got married in 2012. My mom attended the wedding. September of 2012, my mom actually died all of a sudden. And I know this is like something that's really close to your heart at the moment. And so I actually got a text to say, Mom's died, call home. And so, because I was in America, she's in England. So that was a huge trigger. And I actually changed jobs in my company. I went from being a client service person to part of the training team. And I believe that God said to me, here's this gift for you. And here's something that you can do where you can make an impact, and you'll meet lots of people. So fast forward to 2014, and I loved the job, but I was kind of bored. And so I was like, you know what, I am going to look to go back into client service. And I had lots of people telling me, that's the wrong decision. I even heard God say to me, you've got a gift, remember? But I was like, no, I'm going to go back to the world that I used to feel stressed out in. And so I went into this world.
So that's something that also interests me, because over and over again, I have done things that I may or may not have known in the moment that it wasn't the best decision. But again, like you said, I knew it was something that probably was going to be stressful, or not simple or easy, but I chose it anyway. So can you talk about that? Like maybe why you feel now, like why maybe you chose that over this other path that you were kind of being pushed towards and being told and confirmed by, you're saying God, and then being told by other people that, you shouldn't do this. What were you thinking? What were you feeling? And why do you think you decided to go the other route?
Well, I thought I knew better, right, than all these people. And I was kind of like, no, this is what I want to do. I am bored.
Are you saying stubborn?
I want to do this. Maybe. That could be one of my traits.
We may be twin flames.
Yes. And so I went back into the job, into the world where I knew it was going to be super stressful. And I was literally in that job probably 1 week, and I knew I'd made the wrong decision. So I was working out of town. I was at a client site, and I literally was thinking I couldn't do this job. And I was in the hotel room, and I'm pulling my hair out, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I said to my leader, I can't do this. And he's like, you can. It's like, this is simple work that it's so easy for you. So that was like one of the longest weeks of my life, because I was really totally stressed out. And so when my husband picked me up at the airport on the Thursday night, because I was a management consultant who left on a Monday and flew to the client site and came home on the Thursday, my husband picked me up at the airport as normal. And he had the song playing in the car. It's the Ferrell song. Ferrell. Happy, 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 happy. That song. And I said, turn that off. I'm not happy. And I said, I'm going to quit my job. I can't do this anymore. And he's like, no, you can't quit your job. And all night I kept saying to him, I'm going to send an email to say I've quit my job. And he said, no. And so 6:00 in the morning, the following day, I called my boss. And I said to him, this is the hardest phone call of my life, but I am telling you that I'm quitting my job and handing in my resignation. And he's like, well, first of all, it was 6:00 in the morning, so I probably got him out of bed. And he stayed on the phone with me for more than 2 hours, which was incredible. I mean, he was a great leader. I mean, I'm sure if it was another leader, they might have said, okay, fine, come in and like hand your laptop in and we'll like take you out the system. But my leader knew me really well, which is great. So the importance of knowing the people that you're working with, right? And so he basically said to me, you need some time. He said, this is not like you. Go and take 5 to 7 weeks. So that 5 to 7 weeks ended up being more than 4 months. And I remember calling my friend.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
So you said that you were telling your husband, right? You were like, I'm not happy. I'm going to call, I'm going to email, I'm going to tell them that I'm quitting. And your husband's like, no, you can't quit. And then you call your boss, and your boss like immediately kind of knows there's something wrong and has this lengthy conversation with you, probably because your boss was worried. And not that your husband wasn't worried, but he wasn't picking up on,
Yes.
on, the distress that you were in.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say so. Because I was so stressed out in my job anyway. So this was not probably something unfamiliar to my husband, where it was unfamiliar to my boss. because, you know, when I'm in work, I'm putting on the mask of everything's okay, I've got this all together, and then I come home from work and I collapse because I'm so exhausted for playing the game.
So is it also fair to say, is it also fair to say in your husband's defense, though, that, you know, people who are close to you don't always like maybe see it, just like, you know, you put on weight or you lose weight and it's 10, 20 pounds and other people are like, oh my God, like you lost so much weight. But when you're that close to somebody and you see them every day, you don't notice maybe the little, you know, the smaller along the way details of what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, totally. And so I basically called my friend, who's my prayer partner, and told her what happened. And so she came over and she was there for me. And basically over those few months, I isolated myself. So I was staying in bed. I wasn't meeting people. I really only let my husband and that one friend into my life. And I finally went to see my doctor, and she told me I needed medication. And I was like, no, I don't.
Can I ask how long that was in between? Can I ask how
long that was? It was probably several weeks. Yeah, it was probably several weeks before I went to see my doctor.
And I'm just asking because a lot of people wait months and years, right?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, the statistics tell us that some people can wait 10 years on average to go and get help, which is kind of scary because it's like if you break your arm and wait 10 years, you're going to have a real problem.
Exactly.
And so, and so I went to see my doctor and she wanted to give me medication, but she knew I didn't like medication. So I refused medication because I was like, I'm just sad. I don't need medication. And eventually I went to see a psychologist because I was going to go through talk therapy. And my psychologist told me I needed to see a psychiatrist. And I was not happy. I remember being in my psychologist office and screaming and shouting at her. I'm like, no, I just don't have enough faith. I need to pray more. And she was a Christian psychologist, and she basically said, no, if you break a leg, you go and get help. You have a broken head. You have a broken brain. You need help. But I was
so this is something that we talked about.
Because of the stigma.
Right. So this is something we talked about in our last interview, was not only is there the stigma around it, but as a Christian, we're both Christians. And as a Christian, you know, sometimes, and it might be said by people in the church, or it might be just, you know, what you take from it, right? Or what you believe, that we're supposed to be strong enough and have enough faith to be able to get through anything, right? And I do believe that, but I do know that there was times that, you know, I was severely depressed, and things that I, you know, probably could have used some other help, and maybe medication, maybe not medication, but I did not, nothing. You know, I didn't even realize it until I was way deep into it. Where you at least were seeking out help and, you know, willing to talk to a therapist and stuff, just not really entirely willing to do the medication. So from there, you refuse the medication, and then.
Yes, absolutely. And so I eventually, after a lot of pressure, my psychologist influenced me to go and see a psychiatrist. And when I went to see the psychiatrist, I went under duress. I literally woke up on the day that I was supposed to see the psychiatrist and told my husband I'm not going. And he literally got me dressed and got me into the car and forced me to go and see the psychiatrist. And I felt like Judas. The psychiatrist appointment was $300 because he didn't accept insurance, which is, well, we could speak forever about the system being broken for the help for people with mental illness. And I was walking to the psychiatrist office thinking, oh my goodness, Judas paid 30 pieces of silver. How inflation has gone. I'm paying $300. And I got into the psychiatrist's office and I went to sit down. I sat down with him and he said, "So, why are you here?" And I was like, "Well, I'm a people pleaser. I'm not a God pleaser." So he just looked at me and he's like, "Okay." And then I said to him, "So you're just basically going to give me drugs, right? You're not going to talk to me." And he said, "That's correct. Yeah, your psychologist is the person to talk to you. I'm a psychiatrist and I'm here to give you the right medication." So long story short, I got a prescription from him. I took it home. I filled the prescription and I went on the internet, which like we always do. And then I was like, "Oh my goodness, I can't take this medication. I'm going to get addicted to it." So I didn't take it. And I went back the following week and he said, "How is the medication working for you?" And I said, "It's not, because I haven't taken it." So he basically wrote another prescription for a different medication. I filled the prescription and I went on the internet and I didn't take it. Went back the next week. So this was like after a few weeks, I actually decided to take some medication. It was sleeping medication, which actually didn't give me nightmares, but it gave me weird dreams. Now, one of the things I think it's important for the listeners to know is something that I learned much later, and I always share with people, is that when you take medication, it takes 6 to 8 weeks to kick in. So even if I had started to take the medication, I would have thought it wasn't working.
Right.
And so I had like this stash of medication, right? And so my husband kept getting me up in the morning. We'd go for walks. And one day we went for a walk and we went to Starbucks. And the barista said to me, "So what are you going to do today?" And in my head, I said to him, "Oh, I'm not quite sure." In my head, I said, "I'm going to kill myself." So I told my husband that. And my husband said, "I am not going to work today. I'm staying at home with you." And I said, "Don't be silly. I'm not going to kill myself. I just thought that. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be okay." So my husband stayed home for like half a day and I convinced him to leave. And he went off and life continued with me just staying in a dark room and not speaking to anybody. So I was literally like, I felt I was in the deepest, darkest pit of hell. And I felt like there was no hope. And I just kept spiraling. And so the following Sunday, we went to church and my husband had to go to a soccer meeting. And it's that Sunday that I basically looked at all of my medications and I decided, I don't know what else to do. I'm just going to have to kill myself. And so I literally held the pills and I was crying my eyes out. I was crying. The tears are rolling down my face. And I'm like, "Lord, Lord, Lord, is this really what it's come to? Is this really what it's come to?" And I sat and I Googled, do Christians go to hell or heaven if they kill themselves? And obviously it's Google. So some people say yes and some people say no. And so I was like, well, I'm going to hell anyway, so I'm just going to kill myself. And I actually wrote my letter. My friend from California actually called me and I saw her call and I was crying and I thought, I can't answer the phone because I cannot say to her, "Oh, I'm just about to kill myself." And so I wrote my letter and then the next decision was, where do I sit so that I look good when I'm dead, when my husband comes home? So can you like just see how your mind just is like, wow.
You're having all these irrational thoughts, right? You're having all these irrational thoughts and
yeah.
But in that moment, they're not irrational. You're like, this is completely normal.
Oh,
this is like
totally.
No.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I mean, the more that I'm learning and the more that I'm reading and, you know, your thoughts do change your brain chemistry and all those thoughts just feed off one another. And so I finally found a chair and I finally found the pose where I would look good when I'm dead. And I took my pills and I went to take them, and my husband texted me and said, I'm on my way home. Well, that totally, like, that actually does something in your brain. I'm not quite sure what, but like I snapped and I was like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? It kind of like brought me back to reality. And so I picked up my letter, put it down, put my pills away, and my husband came home and I acted normal. And we went to dinner at a neighbor's.
So you didn't end up taking the pills. You were like about to.
No.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. And so we went out to my neighbor's for dinner. And then the next morning I woke up and told my husband what I had planned to do. And I said, I'm going to do it now. And I ran downstairs and I was getting knives, and I was screaming. My husband actually called my psychiatrist and my friend. And my friend came over and she sat there and she was crying. And she's like, Elaine, you need to go and get help. You need to go and get help. And so her and my husband literally dragged me, because like the picture is I'm screaming like a crazy woman. And they're taking me to the car to go to an emergency room for mental people, people who are attempting suicide. And so I went to the emergency room, and I was the first person to be called out of the visitors room because I clearly was in crisis. And the doctors were trying to talk me into going to a hospital, and I was against it. And in the end, they took me to the hospital.
Right. So I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you remember, but that was my job at the hospital. I was a mental health worker, and I worked in the ER in the psychiatric behavioral unit. So a lot of them came in by ambulance, but some did come in with, a family friend or something like that. So what you're talking about is you were sort of forced there to go get help. And then you were like, no, yes. I'm all set. I want to go home. But you were, I don't know if they call it the same thing there, but you were certed, right? Like where they said you don't have an option because you're not stable.
Correct. Okay. Yes. And so I was basically taken in a car that had a glass screen between the driver and me. And my husband and friend were in my husband's truck, and they drove alongside me. And I was just looking out the window like, help. And we got to the facility, and it was literally like, they called in to say I was arriving. I went in, they raised the garage door. They went in. So I'm sure you can know exactly what I'm talking about. And there was a police officer standing there, and I basically looked at him and I was just like, how quickly can I get out of here? And so somebody actually told me that I could sign a form to say I volunteered to be there, and which I did, thankfully. So I was not officially Baker acted, and I was there voluntarily. But being there meant that I was supervised with my medication, and like you get fed 3 great meals a day, and you have group therapy, and you quickly, you think this is normal. And you actually don't want to go back outside because you're like, I don't want to go back into that big bad world. So I was actually in that facility for 10 days. So it was classed as an acute care that I had for 10 days. Then I went to outpatient for 3 weeks. Full day outpatient for 3 weeks. And all the time I'm being supervised. So my medication kicked in. As soon as my medication kicked in, I was like, oh, I'm well, I can go back to work. And so I did. I went back to work, and then I stopped seeing my psychiatrist and therapist because I thought I was healthy, which I would not recommend anybody to do. I still now see my new psychiatrist and my new therapist here in Florida. But I also
that's something that's very important, right, too. So, I've had a lot of people come in psychosis and, severe depression and all these different things. And um, we were newly hired as mental health workers, because everything that they do at the hospital is medical, right? And so a lot of the staff didn't understand, and they would just be like, what is wrong with these people? Like, why don't they just take their medication? Or, why do they drink? Why do they do this? Why do they do that? Why do they act like that? Why can't they just, I don't know, be normal? Right.
Yes.
So
Whatever
how
normal
many
is.
times have you, right? How many times have you guys as listeners, right, gone to the doctors because, I don't know, you have a toothache or a sinus infection or something like that, and they give you antibiotics and they say, make sure you take these for the full 10 days. Well, why? Because, or 14 days, whatever it is, because as soon as you start feeling better, one, you forget, right? When your tooth's not throbbing anymore, your head's not pounding, you forget that you need the medication, right? Because you feel good. And you also think,
Exactly.
well, I'm better. It's been a week. Why am I going to take another few days of it when I don't need to, right? So tell me, but I'm assuming that it's the same when you're taking, medication. And I know I've taken like Adderall for ADHD before too, and I don't like medication, so I always go off of it. But I know it's beneficial, and you feel better.
Yeah.
You're in a different place. You're more organized, whatever, and then you stop taking it, and it's like everything just kind of just starts to fall apart, and you go right back to the
Yes.
same position that you were in. But in that moment, you look good, you feel good, you're like on top of the world, and you stop taking your medication. So it's not
Exactly.
like something like you're saying, I want to be back in the position that I was in. I want to go back to that dark place,
Exactly.
right? Okay.
Exactly. Yes. So I actually did continue to take my medication at this point because my husband wouldn't allow me not to take it. But I did stop all the other support systems that I had. And so I went back into the workforce. I went back into my old consulting role, and I went back into the stress. Now, when I actually had got back to work, I did hear God say to me, mental health advocacy. And I said, no, I don't want that label. But I
I
also
remember you
said I
saying
wasn't going to live in I wasn't going to live in shame. And so I just went back to work, and I carried on working. And basically, like, fast forward, November of 2019, I was told that I was no longer a full-time employee. I became a contractor, which I was fully happy with. I was like, thank you. I'm not going to be as stressed. And then in the January of 2020, I actually got a contract. And I just was back into my performance based, like trying to outperform and trying to basically do more than I should have been doing. And like 2020 was clearly the COVID year, right? And so I started working remote in March of 2020. And lots of triggers continued. And basically, I quit my job at the end of my contract. So my contract was going to be extended for 2 weeks, but on my actual real date, I quit because I was in a place where I felt like I couldn't do my job anymore. I felt like I was out of control. And I thought the only thing I know what to do is to help the client by saying, this is what needs to be done. Now I'm going to quit. And I felt great when I quit. But then the thoughts started again, and I start to spiral down, and I am all back into the place where I was in 2014. And this
So quick
time you would
question.
think, yeah.
Quick question. Now, you said you were still taking your medication at this time, but you weren't
Correct.
utilizing any
Yes.
other supports. Okay.
Correct. Yes. And so my husband actually said to me, let's go to the hospital. And you would think that I would have said yes, but I was like, no, I can't do that. So don't ask me why, but your mind and your brain wasn't working properly. And I actually did connect with my psychologist from North Carolina, and we had some good conversations. And she did tell me, she said, hey, if you're thinking about killing yourself again, then please reach out to me or your husband. And I had said, yeah, well, I've tried to kill myself, but I can't do it. I physically can't do it. So she's like, okay. And I was taking my medication, and I started to go to see a psychiatrist. And by this time now, I've moved out. We sold our house, and I'm now in a 2-bedroom apartment, subleasing it from a friend. Super dark apartment, and it just wasn't the right environment. And then we went to a rental house. And there's so many God stories in all of this that I'm missing. But basically,
well, we'll have
I
to
was
have you
back
on
in a
another
place.
time. We'll have to have you on
Yes.
another time to go from, you know, your story to the in-depth depression and story
Yes.
to the, you know, the other side of it. And I would love to have you back
Oh,
for that.
yeah.
But go ahead. So
Yes.
now we're talking about
So
your second attempt.
second attempt, yes. And so now I'm back in a place where I am in bed all day. I'm not doing anything. I've isolated. One of my really good friends, she just kept calling me. She's like, hey, friend, how you doing? Which I would say, for any of your listeners, if they see that somebody is struggling and they're not reaching out for help, the best thing that you can do is just to call on your friend and don't give up. Even when your friend doesn't answer the phone, even when your friend says that they're okay, but they're really not okay, it's really important just to keep checking in on them. Like my friend would call me every day. I didn't always answer the telephone, but when I did, she would be like, hey, friend, how are you? And I'd be like, I'm okay. Or I'd say, I'm depressed. And she would say, well, let's go to lunch. And I would literally get out of bed 5 minutes before she would pick me up, throw some clothes on, go and have some pizza. She would do all the talking. I wouldn't say anything. And she would drop me off at home, and I would go back to bed. So that was the cycle that I was in. And again, I was thinking I was out of control. My life was out of control. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do in my life. And so basically this one day, I saw a bill that I didn't think we had the money to pay for. And so my way of coping with that was, I'm just going to take an overdose. I'm just going to end it. Which I did, but I didn't end it, thankfully. And as soon as
So
did,
you did take the pills this time.
I did,
Okay.
yes. And as soon as I did, I sent a message to my husband to say, I just took all my pills, but I'm okay. You don't have to come home. And I sent a message to my friend, who's a doctor, to tell her what I had done. And so she called me back immediately and told me I needed to go to the hospital. And unfortunately, my husband had left his phone at his work site, so he didn't see the message for quite some time. But as soon as he did, he contacted me. And my friend had actually had her son-in-law come over to sit with me waiting for my husband. So when my husband came, I was like, I'm fine, I'm good. We don't need to do anything. And he took me to the hospital. And I was just in the regular hospital this time. And I was in the hospital for 3 days. And my psychiatrist was actually on call. And he came up to me and he said, Elaine, what are you doing? And I said, I know, Dr. Unson, I'm stupid. I don't know. And he said, no, you're not stupid. It's your disease. Like, you're not well. And in this time, I had been Baker acted. And I said to him, I cannot be Baker acted because I'm going to get thrown out the country, which is so not true. So he actually agreed to redact my Baker Act. But what I didn't realize was that there was a condition. And I didn't know that there was a condition. And the condition was that when my husband came to pick me up on day 3, I thought I was going home. And my husband said, no, we're going to a facility. He said the only reason why your Baker Act was redacted is because the psychiatrist had said to him, basically, you need to take her to get help. And so I was not very happy about that. But and I said, well, let me just go home and get some clothes. And my husband said, no, I've got your bag packed. We're all ready to go.
So a little bit of tough love there, huh?
Yes.
A little bit of tough love.
And tough love is really important. I mean,
but it's got to be tough too, though. It has to be tough too, though, for the other person to force you and say, no, like, this is not, we're doing this.
It's really hard.
And I can imagine as a spouse or, even say your child, right? Because I've kind of gone this route a little bit with my kids in the past to, you're afraid you don't want to force them, you're afraid that you're going to push them towards it. And, now knowing what I know with my education and my background in mental health and being a mental health first aider, right? It's no, you're not going to push them towards it. If they're already thinking it, right? And I think you can vouch for this. If you're already thinking it, you're already thinking it. Somebody talking about it to you is not going to put it in your head. It's already there.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's a myth. Like some people say, well, if I say, are you planning to kill yourself? Then you put the idea in the person's head. But you're right, Natalie. It's like the idea is there. So no, it's important to ask that question. And my husband actually said in the car on the way to the facility, he did say, I can understand why people get divorced in these situations, because it was really tough on him and on my daughter and my son-in-law. And so this time, the facility that I went to was classified as a residential psychiatric unit. So I was actually in that facility for 75 days. So this time last year, I was in the facility. I spent Thanksgiving 2020 in the facility. The food was great. The people were great, but I would rather be with my family.
Right.
But the first couple of weeks that I was there, I was still trying to be in control, and I was still crying and saying, because we were allowed our cell phones in the facility, and I was crying to my husband, please, I'm so sorry, please take me home, let me come home. And he, again, tough love. He's like, no, you're not ready to come home. And
so we have a few minutes left, and like I said, I'd love to have you on again to talk about like a bunch of things. And just in our conversation and me listening to you, like I was hearing, like, you kind of knew where you were headed, but you were maybe in denial, and you were like, I'm fine, I don't need help. And then I also heard you say, like, my friend called in that moment, like that moment where I was just totally broken down and crying, and I was like, oh, I can't answer the phone, right? And then your husband texts you in the moment that you're about to take the pills. And I think those are a lot of God winks, right? Like those interruptions, right? To stop you from doing what you're intending to do. Right. And so just, I'd like to kind of just like, for the people out there who have ever had suicidal thoughts, who have ever attempted suicide, or who are maybe just sad right now and not maybe taking it seriously or whatever, to just, what is your best advice to them? And again, you and I are both mental health first aiders, instructors, right? So we teach people about this and have a background in it and things like that. And this is what we're trying to teach everyone out there is how to approach somebody, what to say to them, to ask open-ended questions. Like you said, your friend took you out to eat and just talked, and then maybe asked you a question that you could maybe say yes or no to, might have given a little more information, but then just sort of left it alone. So what is your advice? What knowing what you know, what would you say to people who are on either end of it?
Yeah. So for the friend and the family member, and if you know that something you actually see something is wrong, you've seen the change in behavior, that it is important to ask the question. And depending on the level of crisis, it is important to say, are you thinking about killing yourself? And practice saying that question. So you get, like, as an mental health first aid training, like practice saying the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking of suicide. And, you know, my response was no, even though it was. But it's okay to ask the question, because then at least the person knows that you know and you've seen a change, and it's showing that you care. So be there for them. And for the person who is maybe thinking about killing themselves and having suicidal thoughts, I would really strongly encourage you, as much as you don't want to do it, I would encourage you to seek help. Like, speak to a family member, speak to a friend, go and see your doctor, call the National Suicide Hotline, which I can tell you, the National Suicide Hotline, it's in my cell phone, and I have it. And so have it in your cell phones. And it's going to be a much easier number in the future. But for now, it's still 1-800 273 8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. And call them.
Put that
There's
in your phone.
qualified people are 24/7.
And so what Elaine was saying was that there's a number coming, right, in 2022
next year,
which I believe is going to be 988, I believe it's going to be. So it's like a 911, but it's for crisis and mental health, which is amazing and awesome, right?
Yes.
You know, thank you so much for sharing your story and kind of just, you know, being vulnerable, and I know people listening to this might be like, you know, it doesn't sound real, right? But anybody who has been in this anybody who's been in this predicament knows. Well, and it's like looking at you today, and you're a mental health first aid instructor, and, you know, like your father called you brain. What do you call you? Brain, right? Because you're smart, and, you know, you look successful, and so you don't look like you're suicidal, right? You don't look like you have mental health issues, and that's just it. You know, one in 4 adults have issues with mental health. Not necessarily suicidal, but, you know, whether it's anxiety or depression or whatever it is. And we all look like this. We look normal, right? Like, I've been depressed. I've had anxiety attacks. I've had panic attacks. I've, you know, experienced so many different things. And it's, and what does it look like? It doesn't, I mean, it's psychosis maybe. Yeah. If you're in the middle of a psychosis episode, that might look a little different. Anxiety could look a little different, but we're all walking around every day dealing with all this stuff and these thoughts in our heads, whatever they are. And so that's why you have to talk about it. That's why you have to ask questions, right? And you have to engage in those conversations. And would you also say that you think it would be helpful, like, you knew you weren't okay, but like I said, maybe you were in denial, or would it have been helpful if other people would have been, because this is something they teach in mental health first aid too, is, you know, Elaine, I'm worried about you. Like, you haven't been yourself lately. I noticed that, you know, you're showing up to the clients' houses late all the time. I've been getting complaints about that, and you're never late. I've noticed that your hair, you know, you're kind of letting yourself go a little, and I'm not trying to offend you, but like, I you know, and again, this is, you got to be careful. The relationship, like you said, your boss knew.
That, people actually said that to me, but they did, but I was like, I think I was so far gone that I didn't respond. So maybe if that was earlier in the process, but I was not in a good place. But I would say, you know, that people who feel like that they want to kill themselves, it's not that they really want to die, because once you're dead, right? You can't come back. You can't like change it. So it's not like you really do want to die. You just don't know what else to do. And so you can seek help. And one of the real pluses of COVID is that more and more people are talking about mental health. And one thing that I would share, and I am really big on sharing, is your brain is an organ, like your heart. So if you have problems with your heart, you go and get help. It's important to get help for your brain. It's important to keep your heart healthy. It's important to keep your brain healthy. And I think the more and more that becomes part of the conversation, and we can change it to talk about the brain and less about mental, then I think the more accepted it will become in society as well. I mean, we know that there are lots of problems in the overall system, like policy and all that. but at least if we can start with changing the conversation, to me, that's really powerful.
Yes. So a couple things that, you had mentioned is early intervention, right? Early intervention is
Correct.
important because had you got help early on before you let it go and let it go and let it go, you probably wouldn't have gotten to the point of thinking about
Correct.
killing yourself, right? And then
Correct.
maintenance, right? We maintain our cars, we maintain our, our dental health, we maintain, all these things. So I started a podcast called Mind Pulse. And basically it's just these short little, like maybe 3-minute clips of different mental health things. Because, and I said Mind Pulse because, we check our pulse, we check our blood pressure and all this other stuff, but we don't check our mind pulse, right? So it's important to just make sure that you're checking in with yourself. And then if you're not feeling right, and you seem to, have done that. You told your husband, kind of what you're thinking, what you were feeling and stuff like that, which is great.
Oh, yeah.
But you didn't go get the help. So that's what we need to do.
Absolutely.
We need to check our mind pulse. We need to, regularly do that. And then when we're not feeling good, to go for early intervention, checkups and maintenance along the way.
Yes.
And then even after the fact, like you said, going forward, it's just like any other, somebody who is in recovery for alcohol or drug use, right?
Correct.
You still have to make sure that you're talking to your psychiatrist or psychologist, that you're, getting checkups and making sure that you're doing what you need to do, because once you start feeling good, you put it by the wayside and you forget about it and you think, I'm fine, right?
Absolutely.
Well,
I mean,
Elaine,
I
thank
still
you so
take my
much.
medication.
Good.
I still take my medication, and I still see my psychiatrist, and I still see my therapist. I'm looking after myself.
Right. Good. I'm glad to hear. I'm glad you're still here, and that you were able to share your story, because it's so important, and especially right now with the holidays and everything coming. We didn't come on to make people sad, but we came on to raise awareness and to let people know, like, please, you were put here on this earth with other people. You weren't born alone. You don't have to go through it alone. And you know what? You're not the only one who's thinking these thoughts or having these feelings of depression or whatever you have going on. If you're sitting in a room with 10 people, there's a good chance that half of those people in there are struggling with some type of mental health issue or have in the past, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much, English Elaine. And I'm sure I'll be having you back. We'll be talking about your new book and just checking in with you to see how you're doing.
I
All right.
appreciate
Take care.
it. Thank
Everyone
you.
have a good